What's happening, people? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Christoph, and today I've got an awesome podcast. Like, this is not, I know I say that every time, and they are all awesome. This one, we went very philosophical and just kind of discussed a lot of the issues around sustainability as humans, right? Like, I guess it's not really forestry based, this one, but that's all right. It was awesome. I loved having this conversation. Kurtis Ewanchuck, he is I guess we'll call him a permaculturist. Like, he was an arborist and all kinds of other stuff like that. But yeah, we started talking about permaculture, and permaculture is just kind of the methodology of sustainable living, and creating your own energy, your own water supply, food supply, and just being self-sustaining in your own, being responsible for your own impact. It's an interesting way of thinking about things. So we talked about, urban gardening, and we talked about, all kinds of different stuff regarding sustainability. I can't remember it all right now. It was an awesome conversation though. So Kurtis took, I think it was a 10-acre parcel of land that he had, and it was completely unproductive vegetation wise and not a lot of biodiversity going on. And he converted it into a agroforestry, net zero homestead. It's really cool. And, I think he said he created like a kind of a wetland area and a lot of trees, and he's got game on there now. He's got, a net zero home. So he's got his own solar and water catchment and all kinds of stuff like that. And yeah, it was a really great conversation. Just, I had really no understanding of permaculture, what it was even really. Like, you hear the word permaculture and I'm just kind of like, yeah, whatever that is, that sounds great. Is that like, like, what are we talking about? And, so I came into this one really with no plan. I kind of did a little bit of research on him and kind of who he is. And, I had no real questions laid out. I just kind of wanted to see what his thoughts were and what permaculture is, how it works, how we can start integrating this into society. And yeah, we had an awesome conversation. Very philosophical, like I said. I hope it didn't come off as pretentious. Who am I to be talking about this? But it was great. He really knows his stuff. He spent a long time learning how to be sustainable and to be responsible for his own footprint. So it was cool. It was really cool. I think you guys will love it. He's got his own company, expandingedge.ca, as well as Adaptive Humans, I think, is his website with another partner where they provide courses in permaculture and how to do, solar and how to do urban farming and like create your own water catchment system and like stuff like that. So yeah, it was cool. As far as sponsors are concerned, Greenlink Forestry, couldn't do this without the help of Greenlink, provide me a space and everything else. Forest Resource Improvement Association, thank you very much. Funding to help me pay for all kinds of different stuff like advertising and stuff like that. And and Damaged Timber. Damaged Timber is an apparel company right here in Edmonton. They are trying to promote environmental sciences through the sale of their clothing. So they take 10% of everything they earn and they put it towards a scholarship for environmental sciences students. So if you want to be involved in something like that and, buy awesome hats and toques and sweaters and shirts that supports environmental sciences, you can go to damagedtimber.com, put in Your Forest 10 at checkout, you get 10% off. And that's on top of additional sales and stuff like that. So check them out. And that's it. I think I talked enough, right? I'll shut up. We'll let Kurtis talk. Kurtis is a great dude. He just says it like it is. He's a straight shooter. He speaks his mind. He's not filtering himself. So it made for a very interesting conversation. I loved it. It was perfect. Just the kind of stuff I'm trying to look for this podcast. So kind of departure from the hard research side of it and more towards the philosophical questions around how we can become more sustainable as a species. So it was cool. Let's do this. Here we go. So I was thinking, I was trying to think about ways to start this. I guess a good way to start it is, what's three-leg dingo wrestling?
Three-legged dingo wrestling.
Or is that something that we should come back to later
No.
after we've sorted out what permaculture is and the rest of it?
No. I have a Australian cattle dog, like a blue heeler.
Okay.
When it was super young, it broke its leg, just being a wild dog that can't really sense pain and doesn't really know what danger is. And then had it in a cast, and a couple weeks later, broke its leg again. And so we just chopped it off, and now it's got 3 legs, and she is the wildest, funniest creature you'll meet. So happy. A really, really wonderful example of just how in the universe the willpower is the critical element.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
so,
awesome.
wrestling with that creature is a fun thing.
I was just going through your website or whatever, and you're listing all the services you provide on the website, and the last one was 3-leg dingo wrestling. And I'm like,
I have that as a service on the website.
Yeah, it's like it's listed. Yeah, it's listed.
Really?
On the last one.
Huh.
Like right there's you have that photo. There's like a logo of like a person, and then there's like you have. Yeah, it's on there. You should double check.
Yeah, I probably should. That's definitely on my list of to-dos is do some website work. So I'll make that a point, because I could be a service. I could charge.
It's intriguing.
For that,
Well, like I said, I was like, what exactly is that? I want to know. I actually Googled it, and I was like, nothing came up. It was just like, I'm like, okay, well, that's the first question.
That's funny.
All right, so I guess let's just explain who you are, like how you got into permaculture, and then we'll get into what permaculture is for people. I honestly, I can't even put a definition to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my name is Kurtis Ewanchuck. I grew up just west of Edmonton in the hills where it kind of gets forested. Yeah, grew up in a rural setting, but always had, sports and whatnot within a more urban environment. So kind of having that farm background, growing up with, my dad had elk and buffalo, and he was very much a kind of that old school farmer mentality. But also he had been running a hunting and guiding business for the entirety of my life, right? Mm-hmm. So growing up with, bow hunters and a lot of Americans. So kind of creating that a little bit more of a global awareness, or at least an awareness of cultural difference even within North America. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to university, was pursuing my degree in economics, finished up out in Western Ontario.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, at that point, essentially had that question of what am I going to go do now? Mm-hmm. I could go continue to pursue my academic career, as it were, and, get a master's and probably go work for, like, as a policy analyst or something like that. And work for some dude who I didn't agree with or respect. Mm-hmm. Or I could do something different. And so I took a step away from that dotted line and went back and lived in Central America for a bit.
Nice.
Down there, I came across some really cool fledgling permaculture farms in that tropical environment. And then when I was making my way back up to Canada, went up through the US into California, ended up living there for a bit, doing a residency at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center.
Okay.
A guy named Brock Dolman, super cool guy, really inspirational, kind of direct action permaculture practitioner.
Okay.
And yeah, from there I was like, wow, like this is it, right? It bridges the economics of reality with the imperatives of ecology.
Yeah.
And so from there, made my way back up the Western Seaboard. Had a girlfriend in Vancouver at the time, so stayed there for a bit. And then I was like, oh, because this was probably about a decade ago. It was already evident to me that the Lower Mainland was not the place to be in terms of setting up a resilient lifestyle for myself and my family. Mm-hmm. And so I headed back out to Alberta, subdivided a piece off of my parents' farm. I was super degraded, destroyed, overgrazed piece of hillside, and went about designing a master plan for that property using permaculture methodology. And designed and built my own net zero home, and that's gradually started to reforest that land base. Did a lot of regenerative earthwork, so storing, catching, slowing down the water onto the hillside, creating a lot of good habitat for all sorts of different life forms. And with ultimately the objective of it being one of Alberta's, and definitely the capital region's, most fleshed out permaculture demonstration sites. So, that's awesome. So now, as of just this past summer, we running full 2-week intensive permaculture design courses out there. We've got the off-grid kind of tiny home, got the grid-tied family net zero home, food forest, all the different forms of renewable energy and earthworks, and really all of the elements that make up a good, resilient homestead, and ultimately a good education and demonstration site for permaculture.
That's sweet. What'd your parents think about that? It's definitely a different route, right? Like, I mean,
it's... for sure. They're super supportive. I mean, my dad has always been that do-it-yourself kind of guy, really, really skilled. I mean, he's 62, 3 now, and he'll outwork any 20, 30-year-old.
Oh, I feel that.
It's unreal.
I feel the same way with my old man, for
sure. A different generation. So he was really, it's never easy as a young man working sort of on the same farm as your father, right? There's always there's
what's
challenges.
What I mean? Like it's the well, I'm doing the, like, your dad's doing the the classic bison and elk and stuff like that, classic kind of just farming, right? And you're going this, I imagine from his perspective, this like hippy dippy, like balanced thing, right? And it's easy, like, you know what I mean? You look at that and kind of go like, what the hell is this kid doing? Yeah. Like, is this economical? Does this make any sense? Can you make a living? Can you, like, so I'm just curious what, like, just
I mean,
was it a battle?
There's always battles, and antagonism is a thing that I don't shy away from. And so it was just a matter of understanding the permaculture. And so for all of the listeners that aren't familiar with what permaculture is, my favorite way of describing it is that it is a design methodology for regenerative human settlement patterns. So it's quite the definition, but basically it amounts to being humanity's best ideological framework, scientific and sort of otherwise, to navigate the challenges of living on a planet that's experiencing a significant and pronounced decline in biodiversity, in instability, due to our species' current settlement patterns, which are super degenerative.
It's pretty hard to argue with that. Like, it's I think pretty much everyone's in, you know what I mean, when you look at any method of measurement as far as like species decline,
absolutely,
as far as like landscape change and all kinds of stuff. It's true, right? Like, I mean, you look at the Matrix, right? The movie The Matrix, he describes it as the human race is less of a mammal, because mammals find some kind of balance with their ecosystem, right? They tend to live in harmony, whereas the human race tends to just take, right, more like a virus. So it's like it's an interesting, not that I agree with that, but it's like it's an interesting perspective. So you'd say permaculture is obviously, that's the kind of the way I thought about it, is it's kind of a way for like humans to become back in balance with things and become part of the ecosystem, as instead of something that's taking advantage of it. And
absolutely, it really has to do with, like, say on this particular land base that I decided to steward. It really has to do with looking at those metrics, right, that you're mentioning about, species loss, or, soil carbon, or water holding capacity, nutrient holding capacity within the soil, whatever metric you want to use. Really, permaculture is about increasing human quality of life capacity. So improving our ability to have good food, clean water, reliable energy, comfortable shelter, and ultimately a lot more free time so that we can pursue the higher functions, I guess you could say, of human consciousness.
You forgot about the internet. You need the internet.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to some extent. I don't have internet really out on that land base. I kind of live in an off-grid way other than the cell phone's capacity. But taking that piece of land and improving it in every single one of those dimensions that I mentioned, right? And so, bringing it back to kind of the challenges. I mean, there was no shortage of people that were discouraging. There were people that straight out, some builders here in Edmonton at the time, I used the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation's net zero housing study that they were running across Canada. And then I approached a couple of builders here in Edmonton, just kind of looking for advice on how to build my own net zero home. And a couple of the guys, one of the guys in particular, just straight out said, nope, not possible. Don't do it. You have to hire somebody. And so basically I said, politely, go fuck yourself, and did it. And now that's one of the big parts of my business now is really, I have kind of two sides of the business, the adaptive human side. So adaptivehumans.ca, which I run with a guy named Kenton Zervin.
He sounds like an interesting dude.
Super cool guy. Yeah. Definitely would recommend interviewing him on the podcast. He's an educator. He's really, really passionate about helping people to improve their own quality of life, set themselves up for resilience, regardless of whether it's a comfortable future or a really, really hard future that we're facing. So I work with him. We do a lot of sustainability education on a municipal level. We also run, obviously, those more private permaculture design courses to skill people up so that they can go out and be designers and practitioners and consultants and all of that. And then the other side of my professional endeavor is just simply expanding edge permaculture. And that really has to do with the design and development of sustainable human habitats. And so, really that's what it's about. And it's, this is the first year, 2018 was the first full year of the company's functioning. It's been super successful so far. And I'm just in the process of kind of doing up all my financial targets, kind of my business plan for the next orbit and thereafter. And really excited to be here talking with you and looking always to connect with other professionals and other regenerative kind of businesses across Western Canada for sure.
Like-minded people. I feel that's why I started this.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
It's interesting. Like you mentioned, that resistance that you get when you try to do something outside the box, right? Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know why people like to tell you can't do something. It's a super weird human trait to just be like, no, you can't do it. You got no, you can't. Can't be done, right? And I think it's just change, and people are skeptical of change, I guess, or whatever. But it's I could see it being like the number of people that I talk to in the city that are interested in this kind of. I think it's probably comes from like living in a steel building or living, you know what I mean? Like you're so away from nature that people are like, I want to get back to this on a daily basis, right? I think that's what drives people towards it. Whereas people in small towns, they're living with nature, so they don't have that desire or that kind of need, I think. Some people, I mean, not to say there's not people there that do want to do this as well. But it's an interesting concept to try to create your own like self-sustaining system where you provide your own food, water, energy. And like, I mean, it's not possible for everybody, but like as a society, it doesn't mean that we couldn't put permaculture strategies and ideals into like a city plan as opposed to an individual home plan, right? Like that's totally. So like what, I guess we should kind of get into it. So like so as far as permaculture is concerned, like what's the type of stuff that you did on like your property, let's say, to try to accomplish that? And also like one of the big things I know, one of the naysayers will say cost, right? It's like, this is too expensive, it doesn't work, it's not effective, it's not efficient, it's just it's the same. Some people will say, for example, you can't get solar, like solar's not worth it in Canada because we have the sun angle so low, we can't get enough, you'll never pay it off. Is it just a dream, or like you want to do it because you want to be sustainable, or is it something that you think can be like effectively financially accomplished? So really the I just asked you like 4 or 5 questions.
You did, and I've got like like 1,400 answers to those questions.
Pull this a little closer.
Yeah. Really, what it amounts to, in my mind, and keep in mind that my background is in economics.
Right.
So
Perfect.
I'm really, really interested in concepts like opportunity cost, in the kind of the fundamental precepts of our current framework of deciding what is economic. And so just backing up a little bit, understanding that as a species, as a culture, we unlocked the power of hydrocarbons, 250, 300 years ago. Since that time, we've acclimatized culturally, industrially to cheap energy, right? So rather than us having to observe nature and work within those natural patterns that have proven themselves viable over billions of years of evolution, we tend to solve our problems in this society by throwing energy at them. And that's a very, very short-term solution.
Agreed.
It works to some extent. It has worked very well for us from a simple, like if you look at population dynamics, right, and in our ability to reproduce and ultimately, in biblical terms, have dominion over the earth.
Well, provide, right? Like, there's no way we get to this population number.
That's right.
We didn't have fossil fuels.
That's right.
It's just fossil fuels has allowed us to become prosperous. And one weird argument I make is that it's kind of given us the opportunity to think about these more higher ideals.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? So you can't poo-poo fossil fuels when it's allowed us to become this society that can now look back and go, okay, maybe we should be more sustainable. Maybe we should think about these things. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's really what we're faced with. So in terms of permaculture, what I maintain as a viable strategy for our civilization has to do with transition. So it really has to do with, acknowledging and honoring the history of, say, industrial civilization and how we've come to be where we are, so that we can have things like a global, internet, where we can communicate pretty much instantaneously across the entirety of the planet, and utilize all of these systems that we have today to project the future that we actually want.
Yeah. And
in permaculture, it's an ethical science, right? So it really values, like in rhyming terms, it's earth care, people care, fair share. So there's three really fundamental ethics, but those ethics are derived from a prime directive. And that prime directive is simply to take responsibility for your own life, the life of your family and community, the needs that you're faced with, and meet those needs as locally as possible, and to do so without delay. And so when it applies to a larger scale, to say a city or a watershed, really the best level of analysis and an application that we can apply permaculture principles, whether it have to do with our, like, say, transportation systems, or how we manage our forest ecosystems and the challenges that we're faced with regards to climate change and species migration and all of this sort of stuff. It really does kind of always come back to the household level. It really comes back to getting your own garden in order, getting your own needs met in as comprehensive a way as is possible, whether you're in the city, in the suburbs, whether you're in a small town or on a farm, setting yourself up for food, water, and energy security, understanding the limitations that you're faced with, whether, say, you're living out in the Lower Mainland, say in Vancouver, right, where you have a pretty large scale limiting factor, like the geology, right, like a large earthquake that's going to shake up the entire human settlements of, say, South and West British Columbia. If that's kind of your limiting factor, or whether it's out here on the prairies in a continental climate where we have due to climate change, more and more extremification and oscillation of daytime, nighttime temperatures, more unpredictable precipitation patterns, whatever the limiting factors that you're faced with, city, urban, rural, whatever, take responsibility for your needs as fundamentally as you can, and then start working with your neighbors, right? And that sort of bottom up approach is our best bet when it comes to setting up resilient systems, because at this stage of the game with 7.5 billion humans on the planet, and the degree of crises that we're faced with in economic terms and in ecological terms, there's not much that you or I, Matt, can do to influence those bigger systems. It's just like a population of rabbits, in an enclosure. You give them a bunch of carrots and alfalfa pellets, and those rabbits are going to reproduce, and there's going to be a lot of rabbits. But always you've got the coyotes on the perimeter of that fence looking for a way in. And it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time, whether it be, like, to keep with the metaphor, whether a tree falls on the fence and the coyotes are able to get in, or whether the coyotes can dig underneath the fence. They're going to get in, and that rabbit population is going to...
The coyotes being like a pandemic or...
Precisely. Yeah. Multivariate sort of population predators.
Yeah.
And so from a permaculture perspective, we do need to understand that we are in as a species now, we are in a position of overshoot. We are far beyond the carrying capacity of planet Earth. Our consumption, I think this year we basically ripped through the Earth's replenishment capacity. So natural systems' ability to kind of provide for our throughput, our economic throughput. We ripped through that by like May or June or something, right?
Yeah.
So every single month thereafter, we're essentially stealing from systems that are in a state of decline. And so at some point, just the laws of ecology, the laws of the universe, so to speak, thermodynamics, the whole thing, it reaches a point where the system as we have become used to it can't be maintained. And that's where, Matt, I think the critical factor of humans not liking change and fearing the unknown, that's really where a lot of our work exists as permaculturists, to educate, to engage, to have these uncomfortable conversations, whether it be in a public policy format or just in a private sort of podcast like what we're doing today, and really be unafraid of the ramifications of using our unique position in history to think through where we're at and what we actually would like to see. And yeah.
No, and I agree. And I think as a society, we're moving in that direction, at least people in the developed world who have this opportunity to think this way, right? I think more and more people are coming around to thinking in that way. And this isn't a doom and gloom thing. Like, this is something that I think we have the opportunity to turn things around and become sustainable. It'll be a different, like, it's not going to be, the same as the past, right?
No,
it'll be a different future, but we're not trying to say that like we're all going to die. Like, it's just.
Well, I mean, at some point we are.
Well, at some point, yeah, we all croak, but
but that's not a bad thing.
No. It's just the idea is that you're just trying to get people to think sustainably, and like you said, just take responsibility for your own existence, right? And it's not. I mean, in the past, these ideas would have been called like hippie and whatever you want to call it, right? And that's like, it's unfortunate because it's just being responsible. Like, I mean, if you eat a meal, you don't just leave the dishes and keep eating meals and leave the dishes on this friggin' table until they pile up and rot and cause an illness, right? Absolutely. No, you clean the dishes, you take care of it, right? So it's kind of, I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
it works.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see people moving in that direction, and I see positivity in that. I think as a culture, we're moving in that direction slowly, right?
Yep. And it is exciting. It is exciting, and it is.
People like yourself and people like your partner, and there's another guy, a friend of mine was telling me last night, forest city plants or something like that in the city.
Yeah, Dustin Bajer. Yeah. He's an educator with the Edmonton Public Schools, and he does a ton of amazing work with getting youth engaged and everything from beekeeping to to backyard permaculture. And the Edmonton Permaculture Guild, I mean, there's no shortage of really, really awesome, capable humans, from Edmonton to the West Coast down through all of North America, South America, Australia. I mean, permaculture has grown to a point now where the largest challenge that we are faced with is bringing, as permaculture designers and educators and practitioners, is bringing that regenerative design methodology into the mainstream, I guess you could say. And fundamentally what that means is raising the level of professionalism that we engage our clients and our communities with, and also raising the level of policy participation. Politics, simply put, right? Man, where we are engaging with our representatives, where we're engaging with our decision making bodies in such a way that it's not oppositional, it's not pie in the sky, ideological, right? In that more kind of blind hope fashion. It's pragmatic, it's functional, it's like creating cost savings, like with my company, say right now, like working with agricultural producers, and identifying parts of their property that are not agriculturally productive, whether it's because of flooding, whether it's because of erosion, whatever, and putting those systems into more stable, say, agroforestry assemblages that, or maybe they're wetland assemblages that can support migratory species, whatever it is, creating cost savings in the near term, but always within the context of multi-decade planning. Long-term thinking, that we're able to invest in, say, species that might not necessarily exist currently on, say, the eastern slopes of the Rockies, so like, say, Doug fir, right? And really working to transition ecosystems through, say, afforestation, such that not only are we stabilizing our micro and mesoclimatic systems, but we're also creating tons and tons of resources for 3-4 decades down the way, where we can replace our housing stock with super strong, viable local wood. And so really looking at whatever system we're dealing with, seeking multiple yields, so seeking advantages in how we interact with those systems.
No, that's awesome. It's a fascinating concept, and I'm glad I got you in here to talk about it, because it's not something I've had. I mean, a few buddies and I have, we shared the shit about it, but nothing really solid like this. So I guess let's talk about let's get into kind of the first steps into this kind of thinking, like permaculture thinking. So,
absolutely,
for example, like we were saying with your property, so you said you had a kind of an unproductive agricultural. It was just kind of grazed to death sort of thing, right?
Yeah, no topsoil.
Okay.
Yeah. Super clay subsoil. Quite a large variation in topology. Only 10 acres is what I subdivided off of that 80, 90 or whatever it was. On my parents' kind of primary parcel. So really, when we're starting to develop a piece of land, we look at we take a step back and we observe. So the first thing that I did is I built a little shed midpoint on the hill, which is always a good, so midpoint on your topology is a good place for human dwellings.
Okay. Being
aware of your main sectors. So your sectors can be anything from like cold wind to fire to pollution to crime. So sectors are just kind of understanding where your dominant forces are coming from, working with those sectors to create, some sort of outpost, right? That you can observe the system. So I took a year, walked the land, figured out how water was moving, how the soil was behaving, everything from like moose and deer, which would, be vectors for tree health and all that sort of stuff, paying attention to that. And then from there, once I understood those larger sectors, I started designing with something called zone theory. And zone theory really is just about how we occupy a particular space. So zone 1 would be like your front deck, your front yard. You're on it every single day. You're walking through it every single day. So it's easy to manage, right? Because you're frequenting that zone a lot, you could potentially spend a little bit more energy on the elements within that zone. And zone 5 would be, so you go zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where nature rules supreme. So zone 5 is, say, that part of your property or your community that is essentially run, governed, and managed by nature. So you go into zone 5 to relax, you go into zone 5 to learn, you go into zone 5 to essentially take lessons that you can bring back in the zone 1, 2, 3, 4. So taking that piece of land, observing it, essentially developed a master plan, right? Understanding topology, all that, brought in some heavy equipment. And that's one thing that should be mentioned is permaculturalists, we're not afraid to utilize modern technology, whether it's drones or, a 20-ton excavator. There's a role for technology and for large-scale disturbance patterns. The question is, are those disturbance patterns regenerative or are they degenerative? So on that land base, I dug a bunch of swales, created access on the ridge line simultaneously. So dealing with the water, so slowing down, spreading out and sinking water across the landscape from up high all the way down low, creating access so that we could get in, motion machines and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Easy to deal with snow in the wintertime. And then from there, putting a lot of thought into how I, in this case, designed and developed the primary shelter, the family dwelling. And so good passive solar, active solar components, lots of insulation, lots of insolation. So using thermal mass to essentially hold the warmth and hold the coolth. And yeah, from there I worked on the vegetation side. And so now it's unreal. I mean, from really the beginning of May, sometimes as early as the beginning of April, all the way through till even now, say, as we enter into November, I can just walk outside of my place and there is abundant fruit and forage around. It's easy to harvest the odd white-tailed deer for protein. I can have the chickens running around in my food forest. So tons and tons of protein possibilities. And it essentially requires very, very little effort.
Once it's all set up.
Precisely. Yeah. So there's that large input of energy, in the first few years, when developing a permaculture sort of system. But as with any good economic structure, you've got a return on investment that is, essentially exponentializing over time. And that's where the only thing in the universe that has ever been able to defeat entropy is life. It's biology, right? Robots can't do it. So that's
where... I have to get a physicist in here to debate that one. I'm not going to pretend that I completely
you need a biophysicist.
Yeah.
But truthfully, it's through self-replicating systems, natural systems, that are able to essentially form on a substrate of not very much, just a little bit of water, a little bit of nutrients, a little bit of sunlight, complexify, reproduce, and then essentially create a surplus from which us as, bipedal primates can walk around in our underwear and eat berries and apples and all manner of cool greenery.
That's awesome. So what, getting to a more practical side of it, just so to try and put this idea into people's heads about how, what this would cost to get. So like you said, you had kind of the worst case scenario, no topsoil. So you probably had to bring topsoil in, right?
No. That's the thing is when you're working with natural patterns, you begin to understand that nature knows how to heal itself very, very well. So fundamentally, you need to work with the nutrient cycles and you need to work with the carbon cycle. So when it comes to the topsoil situation, by creating earthworks, swales, ponds, dams, that sort of thing, you immediately create erosion potential. Erosion is not necessarily a bad thing when you have the ability to stabilize the subsoils. And so you're actually using sedimentation to create topsoil in conjunction with the use of photosynthesizers, with shrubs, trees, nitrogen fixing kind of ground covers, all that sort of stuff.
Lots of grass that'll grow on that, yeah.
Yeah, grass will come in. And understanding really one of the most fundamental things that and you kind of alluded to this when you were talking about how humans these days are separate from nature. One of the most fundamental things that we can do, whether it's in our education systems, whether it's in our households and how we choose to spend our spare time, or whether it's in our decision making and the discussions we have to have around policy and legislation, it's understanding the process of of ecological succession.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
Where we go from essentially a moonscape all the way to an old growth forest. Yeah. And that's what nature does. And if we work with that natural successional model, regardless of what system we're interacting with, we're going to win. Yep. And so that's how we keep our costs down. That's how we keep our financial inputs extremely reasonable. So I can give you straight up numbers. So with the homestead that I built 10 years ago, 10 acres, over the course of 1 year, I said the total input was about $250,000. And that includes everything from drilling the well, putting in the roadways, the renewable energy systems like the solar thermal, biomass, like wood stove and solar PV. So essentially a net zero homestead. Did most of the work myself, right? So you could, if you were going to include like a labor cost, you'd be looking at about $500,000 at the time, right?
Yep.
But if you sort of amortize that cost over even this decade, there is no bills in the sense that it's a net zero homestead.
Well, you could turn around and sell it today for more than that.
Easily $1 million, no doubt about it.
So you took it from
real estate markets, yeah.
Right. So you took it from something that was worth like whatever, like $40,000.
Yeah.
Right. And turned it into something that's worth $1 million.
Absolutely.
By putting in half that amount of money.
Absolutely. And the hardest thing to get the modern like Homo economicus to think about are all of the externalities that are built into our energy, water, food infrastructure at large. So with a permaculture homestead, if you have, a high degree, say, of water catchment system, say you've got renewable energy with a little bit of battery backup, and obviously if you got a really, really great agroforestry, food forestry landscape, your costs are so minimal. But your degree of security is really, really high, so that it doesn't necessarily matter if a pipe breaks or like somewhere, in Edmonton, or, there's some degree of financial or military or, ecological collapse somewhere else on the planet, right? You're not susceptible to those same systems. And so I think that for a lot of people, especially if they have an interest in the unique sort of evolutionary funnel we're faced with, that upfront cost can be, not only does it make sense economically and financially when you start amortizing over time, but that quality of security and peace of mind, not even to mention kind of quality of life stuff, like in terms of like your human health and enjoyment and whatnot, it really starts making a lot of sense. And so now, like through my business, really where I'm at in terms of being able to offer design development solutions for clients in terms of sustainable human habitats is a good maxim in our current system, and this could change quite rapidly because our like financial markets and we're on the precipice right now of a massive economic adjustment. But $10,000 an acre. So you could say take that $10,000 and put it on like a half acre, quarter acre lot here in the city of Edmonton, or you could take that 10,000 and put it into a more rural acreage, and that will go a long ways, particularly on the water and the food side, to setting you and your family up for security. If you're interested in kind of the energy security side, the most viable form of renewable energy is biomass, right? If you have, and this is more for the rural client or the farmstead and homestead side, because woodlots are extremely easy to manage, especially where you got, you know, the populist genus to work with, right?
Yep.
They're very willing to just sucker up, right? And so the coppicing, good woodlot management practices can create a perpetual source of essentially free energy.
Oh, and if you want something that's totally hands off, like wood pellets, there's plenty of like completely sustainable wood pellet producers in the province here.
Absolutely.
That you can get sustainably harvest wood pellet. Like, you know what I mean? It's the shavings and the dust, and it's all from sustainably managed forestry, you know, in the province.
Yeah. And what's the cost of like a pallet of pellets now?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's not much.
Like $100, right?
I wish I could tell you. You probably know better than I do.
So you look at that, say, the biomass side, even if you're going to be using an industrialized byproduct, your infrastructure versus, say, like natural gas, where we're fracking now, you know, like 1,500 kilometers northwest of Edmonton to supply us with our thermal needs. Like, that's a super fragile system. And that commodity is traded on international markets that you're relying on, you know, say the Saudis and the Nigerians and the Americans to do certain things to make sure that we don't freeze in the dark.
It's tough for people to, but also at the same time, like I've had this argument, or I've had people argue this with me, like natural gas in Alberta is unbelievably cheap. Like, it is so crazy cheap right now, right? But your argument is that like that isn't sustainable. Like that could change. So
it's changing already. Right, like we're decommissioning our coal, right? And we're going to throw natural gas feedstock through those turbines. That's going to change the economics quick.
Yeah.
And like a decade is nothing, right? And as I'm sure as you've gotten older and say all of the listeners, like as they, you know, if they're past their 30 mark, you know, 40s, especially 50s, definitely, they start to see that human lifespans are very, very short, and our ability to make decisions on a multi-decade basis are essential when we're starting to talk about transitioning infrastructure. So it's not to demonize natural gas or what decisions we made in the past. It's simply understanding that like the nature of living on a finite planet where there's only so much of everything needs to be dealt with in a context of very, very protracted and thoughtful observation. Yeah. Right? Rather than like protracted and thoughtless action, which is kind of what we do now, right? Yeah. We're like, oh darn, this is happening. Okay, let's respond to this emergency. Yeah. But we lack the context of being able to learn from past mistakes and project future trajectories. Yep.
No, I feel you for sure. I think you're totally right. Like, it's just kind of we're so comfortable in this setting that we have right now, and it's worked so well for us so far that it's hard. I listened to a podcast or something. I forget what it was. They were talking about people's inability to appreciate the future, right? Future circumstances, and what this is going to mean, right? Yeah. And it's real easy to be like, well, I'm doing well now, like whatever, like screw the next guy, right? But most people don't even think that way. It's not even that simplistic, right? It's just that like, well, I don't believe in this. It's easy to not believe in some of these concepts like climate change or whatever if you want to be that person. But it's just it's interesting to see us move in the direction that everyone's like more interested in using sustainable biomass to heat their home, or more insulation in their home so that you require less energy initially, right?
Precisely,
that kind of stuff. So it's really I had a guy on talking about solar and just building like net zero kind of homes, right? In the more not in like a tiny home setting, but in more of a like if you have a bungalow and you want to make it as net zero as possible, right? Or just like or try to, because like any little bit, it's not like we're saying here that everybody should go out and be 100% responsible for 100% of everything they can do, because in the city that's not really possible. No, but every little bit that you can remove from, like every little bit of stress that you can remove from that system ultimately helps, right? Like if everybody in the world created 10% of their own energy, water, and food, then all of a sudden, like that's a huge burden off the system, right? And it's not hard for us to do that.
No, exactly. And really, it does need to be understood that comfort that you're talking about, where we have acclimatized ourselves to having pretty much anything we want at the push of a button. Yeah. That is as comfortable as it is,
Amazon's the best,
right? As convenient as it is, it's actually not, I would argue, and this is from more of an integral understanding of humans as an animal, and particularly as an emergent property within the cosmos. So like we're getting into some deep here. Shit. Yeah.
This is supposed to be a forestry podcast. What are we doing?
Right? But if you look at humans as kind of the apex of biological complexity, and as an organism that must be symbiont with its host, which is ultimately the planet, the forest, the fungi, the whole thing, then that convenience, that easy life, really starts to
degrade.
It really starts to emerge as not the best life. That if we are to move into a future, particularly now, where every single data piece that we have, every single signal that the external world is giving us, and even the human systems, right, our economic metrics and whatnot, every single system is telling us that things as they have come to be, the convenience, the comfort, whatnot, that whole way of doing existence for human civilization isn't actually viable over the long term. It's worked
so far, but
well, it has worked so far in that it hasn't
collapsed yet.
That's right. Yeah. And that what if you look at, let's say you look at the like psychological health or call it psychological health of as a culture, say Western Canadians, right? Or the physical health, right? You look at obesity, you look at all of these things that really speak to how well we're doing as individuals, as families. We're actually not that happy.
I wish you could put happiness into a metric and measure it, right?
You can. You actually can. There are nations like Bhutan that they're actually doing gross domestic happiness measurements, right?
So
it's pretty cool. It's
okay.
Yeah. There's William Rees out of I believe the University of British Columbia. They the whole genuine progress indicators and stuff. We have the ability, like from an economics science, we have the ability to measure human happiness, and we actually know what to do in order to increase human happiness. The hard part is that, again, it goes back to this desire, this very primal, basic human want for comfort and security, for essentially laziness,
contentness, like just like being, you know what I mean, like just like, well, this is good enough.
Good enough, exactly. Yeah. And that's where I maintain that what is actually most like the easy life isn't the good life a lot of the time.
I would agree with that. When you a lot of people would disagree with me. Like I have this conversation with people sometimes, and most people disagree with me. They think that, like, I don't know, I like Netflix, and like so do I. I like Netflix too. I watch it lots, but like there's also I know that when I'm busiest, I'm happiest.
Yes,
for me. Yep. That doesn't mean that everyone works that way, but for me, I know I am the happiest when I am accomplishing tasks, when I'm like spending time with my family, doing things that are when I'm not passively, not absorbing, but passively
a couch potato,
passively consuming, right?
Passively consuming, yeah.
So it's
and again the context of ecological succession and the context of natural selection through evolution is really important, because it doesn't mean that the 7.5, 8, 9, 10 billion humans can't exist on this planet, for 50 years or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that that's the case. It ultimately means that at some point there is a reckoning, and that at some point there is a type of human that is more fundamentally suited to continued existence within the universe. And that's a hard topic to discuss, because it ultimately means that we have to change ourselves. We have to look at like what created human success over the last, 250,000 years. What are the social means of organization? What are the technologically clever adaptations that we've devised to exist? And right now, with say the sixth great mass extinction in full swing and climate change just really bitch slapping our species on a week to week basis globally, it's a very, very important thing to ask yourself. And again, you can't change what's happening to, in say Singapore right now. You and I, we can't do much, right? But we can change ourselves, right? And it goes back to that prime directive and
it's not difficult.
Taking responsibility.
It's not like we're asking people to like change their like, you know what I mean? Just start somewhere, change something that makes your life more sustainable, and just see where that leads you, right? Because I mean, not everybody's going to care.
No.
Right.
No.
So and like that's just the case. That's just
absolutely
human nature, right? Not everyone's going to give a shit about what we're talking about.
No.
But the people that do, like the parts that you take, can, like you said, remove that strain from the system and help them move us towards a more sustainable future as a species, right?
Yeah. And at the same time, like even though we are talking like in big this terms like, today, like we're going deep and we're going broad. Fundamentally, it really comes down to like, how you want to interact with, your spouse, how you might want to interact with your offspring, the next generation. What type of world do you want them to live in? Do you want them to have access to butterflies? Do you want them to be able to see the beauty of old growth forest right outside, your front door? Or do you want to live on a planet that's beset by industrial pollution that's completely and utterly inhospitable, where the pollution on every single level, right down to your deoxyribonucleic acids, is so pervasive that you're essentially having to explain to your loved ones that, hey, sorry, but life ain't getting any better anytime sooner, because we really just didn't want to turn off the television and go outside and grab a shovel. And
well, that's the thing. I think a lot of people like would have checked out in this podcast a while back. Yeah. Just out of just like, I can't listen to this hippy dippy bullshit, right? It's just too much for me. Like I can't, like, you know what I mean? People just, they reject things that are an offense on their lifestyle, right? People just, it's fundamental.
It's
we just do.
Yep.
And like my lifestyle is not completely sustainable. Absolutely not. Like I you know what I mean? I live in a house. I use natural gas. I use propane. Like I use the coal-fired electricity. Like I'm myself am working through these ideas and getting towards that system, right? Yeah. But it's interesting, to see that kind of resistance, right? And it's unfortunate, but
that resistance is healthy though, and it's where when we fundamentally seek to understand ourselves. And our imperfections, our inability to think about certain things, or our inability to grasp certain concepts or what have you, we can see that in the other. We can see that in our brother. We can see that in our fellow human, and it's having compassion. It's having patience. It's having tolerance. It's having the ability to say, hey, we're all in this situation together. And even though, say personally, I, Kurtis, have, for whatever reasons, have tended towards that permaculture lifestyle at a relatively young age. And now I'm to a certain degree quite established in water, food, and energy security. It's not to dismiss those that aren't there yet. In fact, it's my responsibility to do everything I can to interact in a proactive, progressive way, in a solutions-oriented way, to help everyone else out, such that whatever our skill sets, whether we're working on a drilling rig, whether we're planting trees or whether we're, growing grain, it's ultimately about incremental improvements by taking responsibility for whatever it is that we have control over. If it's that little, balcony in your condo and you just start growing tomatoes or whatever it is, there's so much that can be done. And it's really like, that's the cool thing about humans, is that we're not just a mammal. We are a super-organism. Like the 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 when it comes to human cooperation. It's like 3 or 4, right? And that's really where the hope lies. That's really where we can open up our potential to use the technological capacity that we've generated, and simultaneously call into question certain paradigms, whether it be infinite economic growth or whether it's that consumerist escapism that we tend towards in our culture now. Whatever we have to call into question, it's a lot easier to do that when we approach one another with humility and a certain degree of a creative alliance.
Well, I find it's emotions, right? Like even myself, like my wife is a therapist, and she was saying last night, she was explaining to somebody how anger is a secondary emotion, right? How as soon as somebody feels threatened or not necessarily insulted, but like if laughed at or insecure, they go towards anger. And she said that. I'm like, yeah, that's totally me, 100%. As soon as I feel like somebody's threatening my like personality or like my status or whatever, like I get angry, right? It's like it's trying to, and that happens with lifestyles too, right?
Absolutely.
As soon as you and I come here and start talking about, hey, like you should like work towards sustainability, people get angry, right? And it's just it's a secondary emotion. It just comes up. It just is not you can control, but like learning to recognize, like I'm angry. Why am I angry?
Yep.
Like is this person attacking me, or are they just saying something that they believe to be true and is an objective truth? And maybe I should take that in and absorb it and try and figure out why I'm so angry about this, right? So
totally, and that's one of the most amazing things about the time in which we live. Like we can, whether it's say like your wife and the modern discipline of psychological practice, or whether it be being able to, listen to a lecture on, say, a spiritual tradition, that emerges from the other side of the planet or whatever it is. We have never before have we as a species been able to tap in to the wisdom of what it means to be spiritually mature creatures, where we self-aware, exactly. Whether you want to use the word spirit or whether you want to think of it more in terms of
just understanding
like
yourself.
Neuropsychology, exactly, where we have a high degree of plasticity and flexibility when it comes to our definitions of who we are and what we're about and how we interact with one another. We are extremely fortunate now to be able to interact with other cultures and all the information that is out there, such that we can train ourselves bit by bit, catch ourselves in anger, catch ourselves in, lesser tendencies, whether it be greed or whether it be fear of whatever type. We can catch ourselves, and bit by bit by bit, incrementally, we can improve who we are and how we exist in the world.
Absolutely. No, I look at, like I said, I look at this as a positive thing. Like a lot of things we talked about today were kind of, it's a little bit doom and gloom, but it's also the reality though, right? Like it's also like you could argue the specifics around what we talked about, but the truth is we're using more resources than the earth can produce, and we're heading towards a place where we don't want to find out what that place is. So let's use this prosperity that we've created, all this extra time that we now have, free time, and put it towards something that, like, whether it's towards like improving mental health, whether it's towards improving like physical health, whether it's improving environmental sustainability or just like, or lifestyle sustainability or whatever it is. It's just, moving towards something positive, right? And I see this as a positive. I see it as moving our culture forward and trying to find a more balanced way of going through this thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing. I think we're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely, man. And really, I think that permacultural saying that is very, very common within when you do a permaculture design certificate course.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very apt. It's that the problem is the opportunity.
Learning opportunity for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
The problem is the opportunity. When you have degraded soil and, you have a desert, essentially, a biological desert that's been created by whether it's, say, human agriculture or climate change or whatever, the opportunity of that desert is to learn how to bring it back into fertility and fecundity, right?
And even failure in itself is an opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to not shy away from the problems of the world, to understand that problems and predicaments are both essential to human life, and that's actually what's made us successful as a species. To not shy away from those problems and predicaments ultimately grants us a much, much higher degree of integrity and the ability to look at ourselves in the mirror every morning when we get up and be like, hey, awesome, keep on rocking, and look at one another and find alliances and cooperation to take on these larger and larger challenges that we're faced with.
How pretentious do you feel right now? I feel kind of pretentious.
I don't actually. I don't really.
It's funny how I step outside of myself sometimes and I look at the things we're talking about and I'm like, who the hell am I to talk about this shit? Like, what do I know, right? It's just like, we're all just people trying to figure this thing out, right? This wild ride. It's interesting for me to step back and go like, why should people listen to what I have to say? Like, this is chaos. But I don't know, whatever. That was a weird side note.
I think it's really, for me, so that, like, to not feel pretentious is to know that the actions that one's taking are they're solid. You know, that you're not being hypocritical. This isn't just conjecture. That after this discussion, I got business to do. I got trees to get into the ground. I've got wetlands to restore, and likewise with yourself, right? Like, that this conversation leads to the next podcast and to how you're going to interact with your coworkers here today, and all of this, and understanding that there is no silver bullet, right? That it is that human life in general, it's a process of muddling from one day to the next, doing the best we can.
It's also gray.
Exactly.
Right? It's also gray. From everyone's perspective, everyone else is wrong. And it's just such a, it's fun.
Absolutely, man.
Well, let's finish this off with just some tips or something to talk about where people, so say someone's interested, they live in the city, they don't have a full 10-acre lot to try and do something like this. What would somebody do who has a home, they've got a yard, they've got a garage, whatever. What are some of the small things like that they can do to say solar's really expensive, they don't have the money to put into that. What's something they can do today?
The simplest and easiest is summarized in food, not lawns, right? Turf in general doesn't really offer much. Sure, you can have a good game of football on it, and it's fun to wrestle three-legged dingoes on, but the amount of land that we currently devote to a non-functioning ecology, let's call it, doesn't make sense in the context that we've discussed today. So the most important thing, and the simplest thing that you can do bit by bit, is to transform your lawn, your turf, into some sort of productive ecology, some sort of food, whether it's food for you and your 6-year-old kids. So you got raspberries and Saskatoons and plums and apples and pears and cherries and the whole thing, or whether it's food for, say, pollinators, right? Where there's really, really great flowering throughout the season. It's beautiful. It's functional. Or whether it is planting up like really, really dense carboniferous species so that you've got food for fire, right? Food for, like, essentially fuel. that's probably the most important thing that everybody can do.
Start a garden.
Yep, start a garden. Start gardening. Start transitioning that lawn into food.
Mm-hmm.
From there, I mean, there's a bazillion things, but if anybody wants to hire a professional permaculture consultant, there are really incredible people all across North America now. Here in Alberta, we've got some of the best designers and educators on the planet right now, I'd argue, like Rob Avis out of Calgary, Dakota Cohen, he's out of kind of the Camrose area, Kenton Zurban, as I was mentioning, one of my peers here in Edmonton. There's so many great people that can essentially come by your place. Like with myself, like come by, fly a drone, take an aerial, essentially come up with a master plan based on your priorities as a household, as a family. And then essentially you set a budget, right? And you say, okay, I got $5,000 now. I've got $10,000 next year, whatever it is. And incrementally you improve that land base so that your property is worth more. It's more beautiful. It's way more functional. And to a large extent, then you've taken those first steps. You've set yourself up for a high degree of resilience. And that's really what it's about. Such that, you've got more free time to enjoy the things in life that are the best.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's hard for people to give up their lawn, though. Even myself, I think about my lawn, what little lawn I have. I'm like, oh, but it's nice to chill on that lawn.
Oh yeah, no, you don't give it all up.
But
don't give it all up. But you got periphery, you got corners, you got edges, right? And just with the name of the company, right? Expand the edge. Expand the edge of all of those zones that might not be utilized to the full extent.
Totally agree. Even myself in my backyard, I have a pretty small backyard, but along the garage and along the one fence line, I have like some spruce trees, but there's also a bunch of goutweed. Yeah. Right? Which is just, it's there because it was there when I moved in. But I'm try and get rid of goutweed.
But don't. So get this, dude. Yeah. That's one of the oldest domesticated plants on the planet.
Right. It's also an invasive, though.
It's edible.
Is it?
It's edible.
So
it's one
stage?
of the best. The best is the fresh little leaves. Yeah. You can even eat the old stuff.
It's like salad style?
Yeah. So the fresh. So this is one of the things about permaculture. You never know, right? Like, why is this plant as endemic as it is? Well, because it's actually co-evolved with humans for thousands of years. Yeah. So you could take that, you could throw it like the mature leaves, you could steam it, throw some butter on it, great nutrients, or you take the fresh leaves, put it in your salad. Yeah.
Do they get bitter like lettuce does?
As with all sort of foliage, as it gets older, it gets tougher and you get more.
So get some springtime good eats, but that's about
it. Yeah, absolutely. And work with what you got.
Oh yeah.
Dandelions, for example, best thing to do is make dandelion wine.
Yeah. You can have a lot of dandelions, but it can be done for sure. Well, this is awesome, man. This was perfect. That was hour and 10.
Awesome.
Like I said, I went into this kind of like I did a little bit of looking around like at yourself last night and kind of looking into permaculture and what it is and how it works. And usually, like I said, I come up with questions and stuff. Yep. This one, I was like, man, this could go literally anywhere. I think it's best that we just sit down. And I mean, it went kind of a very philosophical route, but I think that's the right conversation to have.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, if people want to find solutions to some of these problems, there's lots of resources, right? So, but to try and convince people that this is something worth looking into is like, I think this is a good route to go. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. And the conversation today was a lot of fun.
Awesome. So your website is expandingedge.ca, right?
You betcha. And if people are interested in the more educational route, if they really want to get a better handle on all of the kind of the science and the practical step-by-step things that they can do, like the real life skills that I would argue are going to be required in the future for human survival and thrival. Adaptivehumans.ca, and we'll train you up in the ways of the permaculture force.
Yeah, you got courses and all kinds of stuff.
Absolutely.
It looks pretty cool.
Lots of cool things happening.
Awesome. Well, right on, man. People want to reach out to you. Well, they can reach out to me, I guess, and I can send them your way or whatever. You got your email on the website.
Website's there. Expandingedge.ca, adaptivehumans.ca, and look forward to speaking with you again. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Well, if anyone has any questions, reach out to me, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com. Get back to you. And thanks for coming on, man.